Hello and welcome to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations we get to have along the way and sharing a bottle of whiskey with your friends, as we were just talking about in the intro, in our pre-show talk. So we like to get to talking about a little bit of everything. I'm your host, Doug, or as I'm known around the internet, Demi Tastes. Phil is out sick today, so unfortunately he won't be joining us, but he's also excited to try these products at some point. So we'll probably do a follow-up live at some point where we actually go through all the products that Phil's missed due to being sick. Stuff happens. So anyway, our guest today is Philip Mestayer. Wow, I just realized I didn't ask you how to pronounce that. So I'll have you reintroduce yourself and give us the correct pronunciation. He's the head distiller of Distillerie Acadian, which holds the distinction of having the first official American single malt whiskey label COLA submission. So if you don't know what that is, that's a certificate of label approval, if I'm not mistaken. That's the government process of submitting a label to the TTB for approval. And in this case, this is the first time that the words American single malt whiskey have appeared on the label with the full ratified type of American single malt whiskey. So I suppose that could have been anybody. I do have questions about how ready they were with that in the barrel, because it came up really quick. It seemed like it was a week or two after the ratification where that cola came out, and we were super excited. Like, somebody had to be the first. And I don't know if I would have found out about this brand besides that. And they have some really cool products. So I'm looking forward to discussing them with you guys today. So there's a little bit of a dark side to the industry that everybody knows about, but we don't talk about that often because we like to keep it positive as much as possible. But it's important to realize that some products don't make it. And that doesn't mean that the distillery is not going to make it. So we have the interesting distinction here that this very first American single malt cola is actually now discontinued from production. And in fact, I believe it was discontinued from production even before that label was submitted, which is a really interesting choice. But even so, and we'll talk about why. And the why boils down to this is a really small craft distillery. And that product just didn't do well in the target market, which is around the doors of the distillery. So my secret plan here, my evil plot, is to get enough attention on this whiskey, which is very good whiskey, and get people interested enough in buying it that we can convince Distillery Acadian to start making this product again. Right. So that's the goal today. Audience, that's your mission. Go out, get it wherever you can find it. We'll have more information about that later. So Freedom Malts, welcome in. Sean Holtgrave, I don't know if we've seen you before, so welcome in. Thanks for joining. So since this is a live podcast today, you guys can chat amongst yourselves in the YouTube comments, in the Instagram comments if you're on Twitch. All of those chats are good. We'll see all those comments. If you have questions for us, feel free to ask. But for the time being, feel free to share with us and each other what you're drinking tonight. Obviously, we're going to be drinking the Bon Vale, which is again, correct my pronunciation when we get to that, which is the American single malt from Distillery Acadian, as well as two other products. Yeah, with no further ado, Philip, would you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yes, so thank you for having me. So my name is Philip Mestayer. I know it looks like nothing like my name is said.
Okay.
It's spelled. Actually, it depends. If I'm checking into a hotel, I'll introduce my last name as Mestayer, just because it's a lot easier to find in the computer system. But yeah, so I'm the distiller and one of the owners of Distillery Acadian. We've been around technically for 10 years now. 10 years ago, we had the concept to start a distillery. And one of the main premise behind starting a distillery was to come out with a bourbon. We realized that, all of our surrounding states had bourbon, but Louisiana didn't. And we kind of wondered why and looked into that. And now, fast forward many years after that, we actually came out with Louisiana's first bourbon. I will be the first to tell you that it wasn't great. Mm-hmm. So we've actually took a look at every single one of our processes and kind of backed into that, made a lot of changes that happy to talk about throughout this podcast as well, of changes that we made to make a better whiskey. So the whiskey that we are putting out now is very good. I can tell you the whiskey we're coming out here in the next few years is going to be great. But yeah, so I'd say technically 10 years, because whenever we first formed the company, it then took us 2 years to get permitted by the federal and state government to have a legal distillery. Then so we've actually been in production 8 years out of the years. But yeah, so we came out with quite a couple of products. I gave you some samples of some of them. But I know one of the reasons why we're talking this evening is because of our cola that we got approved. So those of you who don't know, you said it right. We have to get every single one of our labels approved by the federal government, and then subsequently the state government, depending on each state if they require it or not. And we've had this single malt out for, I want to say, maybe a year and a half before that specific label was submitted and approved. And we did have that kind of in the back burner. Probably 6 months prior, we had it designed and ready to be submitted. By no way, shape, or form were we looking for the designation to come out and submit and try to be the first. Actually did not know that we were the first until we were actually told that. But what this was we realized, even though we're struggling selling single malt, and we'll get into that there are groups and some certain stores that do appreciate a good single malt. So what this specific label is under that new designation is a single barrel cask strength of that, where a store or a group comes in. So you'll see our standard single malt label will be tan, kind of like the intro and picture to this live that we're doing. The new one for the single barrels is actually a blue one. So that's how you could kind of differentiate between the two.
Right. And you can see those labels on the website. Actually, I was going to get a bottle picture for the thumbnail, and I was like, oh, there's a new SKU now. There's a cask strength. Cool. Like, I want to know how to get my hands on it. So my first question is, and again, back to this evil plot. I feel like normally we close with this, like, hey, where can you find this products? But let's get people thinking about it. Where can people find your products? Do you have an online shop?
So we do sell everything through Bourbon Outfitters. We sell online through Bourbon Outfitters. Mm-hmm. We're currently distributed in Louisiana, Mississippi, and about to be Colorado. Well, Louisiana and Mississippi, both, we do not sell single malt, nor do we know how to sell single malt. Our distributor is trying to sell this as a malted bourbon. We all know that's furthest from the truth, right?
Right. Not a drop of corn in this.
Or is a bourbon and a single malt remotely the same as far as your nose or your palate. So that's one kind of problem that we've seen. But our consumers here in our states, maybe we're behind the times, maybe it's up and coming, maybe it is the next big thing that we're kind of hearing. We don't buy single malt. We have a very local store about 10 minutes from us, been very supportive from the beginning, done quite a few bourbon barrel picks with us. They love this single malt. They won't do a barrel pick with it because they say it'll just sit on the shelves because our consumers don't purchase. Now, hopefully, something like this and getting the word out, people start to realize that single malt is actually good and has its own designation. I think there's people, and I don't want to talk negatively, but they kind of get the thought that single malt is Scotch, single malt is Irish whiskey, and it's completely different. I know, it's kind of just educating people, right? Because you taste our single malt versus even other distilleries in America, their single malts, compare it up against a Scotch, and it's going to be night and day different. Is it a smoky flavor? What kind of characteristics does it have of it? So yeah, we do sell online through Bourbon Outfitters. We just got linked up with another online retailer for barrel picks, whatnot. So if we are talking to anybody here on this live that is interested in it, and you have a group and your group loves single malt, we are opening this up to single barrel picks of our single malt. We also had released a port finish single malt that we have the last one in the barrel right now. And it's been sitting in that barrel for 14 months, and it's pretty darn good. I tried it actually yesterday and took a sample of it. So that barrel is the last one of its kind. Happy to send some samples out of that one as well to see if maybe a group or or whatever wants to do a barrel pick of that. So yeah, so those two online is where we sell. Again, we're Louisiana, we're Mississippi, we're about to be Colorado. Excited about Colorado, especially for the single malt, because what I see is Colorado likes their single malt, right? You have Stranahan's right there, and they only make single malt. And I've been up to their facility. I've been to their Snowflake event, which was amazing, and
such a cool event.
But I think Colorado appreciates a single malt whiskey a lot more than we do here in the South. But so we're in those three states distributed. Like you said in the beginning, we're a smaller craft distillery, but more importantly, we're aging everything longer. And we can get into that, how we're moving to bottled and bond for everything starting next year. So we're holding most of our whiskey back to get to that higher age statement. Now, you're not going to see some 10, 12 years come out of us or most likely any of the other Gulf South states. So we're holding off about 7 or 8 states that have called this until we truly have the product aged and we're ready to start releasing it.
Very cool. Not to like sort of throw him under the bus right away, but Freedom Malts Germ just said he's excited to get more from you. Freedom Malts is part of the Northwoods Whiskey Geeks, I believe, or something along those lines. So that's a club that does barrel picks occasionally. So maybe I just need to connect the dots here. So
yeah,
Germ,
sure.
if you're looking for a cool Gulf State single malt, which is, I mean, we can talk about the environment in a minute, but that's a cool concept in my mind. Super humid, right? I don't know of whiskey aging anywhere else as humid as the Gulf.
Yeah, Gulf South is one of a kind. I mean, you can almost link us with the Caribbean. I would not say the Gulf South and Texas by any means are the same. They're a lot less humid than we are. But yeah, we're very hot, very humid, rapidly aged, but we have to have special considerations with that as well. Aging here in the Gulf South because of that climate that we have. Like I said, you're not going to see 10, 12 years really come out of the Gulf South. Looking at surrounding distilleries, knowing what I know, seeing what I'm seeing, 6 years is going to be kind of our baseline here in the Gulf South, which is going to be a 10, almost 12-year equivalent.
Yeah, cool. It's so interesting how the climate works out that way. But before we move too far beyond Colorado, I just so you've been in touch with Little Wolf, right? So we just announced Little Wolf's soft opening, which happened yesterday. That's nice. The first American single malt whiskey focused bar in the world. They opened in Denver, Colorado. So they are building up a stock of American single malt whiskeys from all over, obviously starting with the local stuff and sort of the big brands that everyone recognize, things like Balcones, Stranahan's. But they are open to getting the cool stuff that comes from other places too. So I put him in touch with Philip to just sort of get those wheels turning, because I know that Distillery Acadian. Did I say that correctly now?
Yes, you did.
Okay, cool. I feel like it feels wrong to like pronounce it too hard in the Louisiana.
No, and people do.
Some
people try to get fancy with Distillery Acadian, and you said it right, Distillery Acadian, and yeah, hopefully we can get up to that, get some product up to them. I mean, this is probably the hardest thing of this industry, and we can dive deep into that if you want, is distribution. We've been trying to get distribution for 5 or 6 months now. Have some distributors tell us no, have some distributors only want to carry our barrel picks and not kind of support our brand. And then some just won't respond. So if any of you out there know of distributors that are interested, we are actively looking to get into to finish that loop in Colorado and get us in the state.
Yeah, I can relate to the distribution problem, because the biggest roadblock for me getting our first barrel pick out the door was just who's going to carry it, sell it, and distribute it, because I don't have the funds to float $10,000 worth of whiskey or more. It would, what was it? I think it was 160 bottles at $120. So like $20,000-$30,000 worth of whiskey. I can't just buy that and keep it in my house. And the other thing is, even if I did, I can't sell it. I don't have a license. So that's not a thing I can do. That's tough. So you got to find someone who knows how to do it.
And then there's where at times, like some of these bourbon outfitters or other shops like that, they do come into to play to help with that. So let's say, your group wanted to release it through Bourbon Outfitters. Let's say you don't sell the whole barrel. Well, now on Bourbon Outfitters, we have a whole page designated to all of our brands and all of our bottles. And if they don't sell out, they can just move over. Now it's not only open, to just that group alone. Now it's open up to the public.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like Bourbon Outfitters is working out well for you. I don't know that I've ever ordered from them personally. Freedom Malts brings up a good point. So there's of course others. Steelbox is an online store. Big Thirst is a fulfiller that works with lots of different distilleries. So Big Thirst is the fulfiller for McCarthy's Hood River. Is the distiller for Whiskey Del Bach. I don't think they're the fulfiller for. Did I say distiller? I meant fulfiller.
Yep.
I don't believe they're the fulfiller for Lost Lantern. I think that's somebody else. Freedom Malts probably knows. As long as we're doing chat call-outs, though, I want to welcome in Donut Fish to the chat. I think last time I didn't put your comment up on screen, so good to have you here. And again, shout out to Sean Holtgrave. Thanks for joining. And that is a profile picture for sure.
Yeah, so we've looked at a couple of the online shops, and we just ended up settling on Bourbon Outfitters, and it's been going pretty well for us.
And of course, you don't want to be all over the place because you end up splitting your releases across too many different places, and then you have a lot of slack inventory. So that's the other major problem, right? Like a lot of special releases, single barrel stuff like that. If you were to try to distribute that everywhere would get 3 bottles.
Well, so exactly. I mean, for instance, I just made a post today that we're releasing our first ever finished bourbon. So we teamed up with a meadery, makes mead out of West Monroe, Louisiana, and they make some fantastic meads, some dry meads, some sweet fruit meads, as well as some dessert meads. And for our first, we settled on a sweeter blueberry mead. But we did it as a test, right? And we want to see, first, I gave them a barrel to see if their blueberry mead was any good barrel aged, and it made it exponentially better. Now, this test was only a 15-gallon barrel, just to see if it worked for each. So they aged the blueberry mead, it worked. They gave the barrel back, and let's say it worked. But so now we're limited to only 72 bottles for our first release. Yeah, you take a 72-bottle finished release, you're giving 1 or 2 bottles to stores and to Bourbon Outfitters, and it just doesn't make any sense. So smaller releases that we do distillery release only. So we're having that this Saturday. So hopefully people come out and get one of those bottles before they're gone.
Cool. Okay. I was distracted for a minute by Instagram. So I posted this comment. We have whiskey tastings. Can't stick around, but is going to watch this one on review because they've been really excited to hear from this, to hear from this distillery. Joe's Whiskey Den, welcome in. Good to see you over on YouTube. It's so much easier to show people's comments on YouTube because Instagram doesn't come over. So, and I'm going to keep saying that live to maybe shame StreamYard into making that work. Unless it's Instagram's fault, in which case they have no shame. And by the way, Freedom Malt says no, Lost Lantern doesn't use Big Thirst, but Cedar Ridge does. And since I just got a box from them, I should have known that. So yeah, Cedar Ridge from Big Thirst. Yeah, cool. All right. And like I said, I told you we get distracted by the comments. So all right. So I poured all 3 of the samples. I could go in any order, honestly. I think each of these 3, 2 whiskeys and a something else, but each of these 3 spirits kind of could be first, depending on how we want to go through the lineup. The first time I tasted them, I did the American Single Malt first. What do you think?
I always like to start people off with T-Moon because T-Moon is in a category of itself. It's a lighter. It'll kind of get your palate acclimated to start drinking for the night. It's not something that's higher proof. I don't remember the proofs that I sent you, so you might have to remind me. I know the T-Moon is going to be 100. Yep. But the actual bourbon and the single malt, you might have to remind me on those.
That's right. So the single malt is a cask strength at 126.4 proof.
Yep. Okay.
A spicy boy, but doesn't taste like it. That's a real smooth drinker. And the Cajun cut is also cask strength, I guess, at 114.5.
Okay.
This is the bourbon.
And good. That's good to talk about. I sent you that sample for a specific reason. So yeah, I'd say let's start with the T Moon. So to let everybody know what T Moon is, very unique product. So the way we make it, I make it with 4 grains: corn, rye, wheat, and barley. But then I add cane sugar to the mash before fermentation. So anytime you add sugar to the fermentation or mashing process, you cannot call it a whiskey. Whiskey has to be made with all grain. So that's why the federal, and really it once you taste it, you realize it doesn't fit into a rum category either. So the federal government makes it called spirits distilled from grain and cane. So you'll get notes of a whiskey from the white oak we age it with. You'll get sweetness of a rum on the back end. So I like to say if whiskey and rum had a baby, it'd be T Moon. And
that's exactly how it tastes too.
That's kind of how I sell it. And funny thing, talking about colas and trying to get things approved is getting ever harder. But I actually tried to update, excuse me, some of those T Moon labels to say that just on the top. Not, it still have the same designation down below, but on the top, if whiskey and rum had a baby, ... Well, the federal government, TTB, said, no, that's too confusing to the consumer. So that's how I sell it verbally. But to let you know, that product is our worst seller in the store. It is our best seller in the distillery. It's a hand sell.
Okay.
People read that label and say, I have no idea what this is. But then once we explain what it is, really what it's not, what it's not trying to be, and kind of have a more of an open mind to it, then they realize, because I've had comments in the beginning say, oh man, I bought it and I don't like it. And I was expecting a whiskey, I was expecting a bourbon. Well, of course, you see it's in a completely different category. So it's a fun one, and this one has been taken out of production. Now I have about 3 years left on what we have aging, but we're starting to do some really fun things with it. I let another YouTuber taste some that I've double oaked and triple oaked in our ex bourbon barrels, and it kind of takes on this rye-esque note, little spice. It takes out the sweetness on the back end, and it's more of a bourbon lover's T Moon. So I realized that what I've done over the last while is I have a barrel right now that I am triple oaking. And I'm about to give a barrel to a guy in Mississippi to make a strawberry wine. He's going to make his wine, age it in the barrel, and then give it back to us. And we're going to do a triple oaked strawberry finished T Moon for our 10-year anniversary coming up probably in October, November this year. So that's gonna be a really fun one. So we're starting to do fun things with it. Starting to work with some groups doing maybe Tokai finish, maybe Imbarana. Basically, you tell me, and I'll do it. So send them kind of the base samples. Here's what we're working with. See the flavor profile, and let's build some around it. Build something specific and fun for your own group. So yeah, any groups out there interested on that, let me know. I'm open for any finishings, quite honestly.
Yeah, I have thoughts that I'll follow up with you afterwards. I mean, obviously, so I mentioned Germ, but we're also in the market for our next single barrel, and the idea of doing a ghost product, I guess I could call it, right? Like where it's out of production. There's something appealing about that, and this is very good whiskey. So we'll talk. But the other thing is that my co-host and I love to plot about getting distilleries together to swap barrels and do cool experiments that way. And we've had more than 0 takers on that, and I can't say who. But it's always interesting to see what people say about that, because a lot of the time you'll have distilleries say like, oh yeah, totally, I would love to work with such and such. And just because everybody's so busy with the work of distilling and the spreadsheets and the marketing and the sales and the distribution and all these other things all the time, they're just not thinking about adding in another segment of their planning to figure out how to swap a barrel with another distiller. It just kind of never happens unless you have somebody saying, we want this special project, we'll do this with you.
Yeah. So I can't say what or who or when, but there's something in the works along those lines.
All right. Now, strawberry wine, that's an interesting choice. Was that just willingness of the partnership, or did you feel like that would be a good match for the spirit?
Yeah, so specifically in Ponchatoula, Louisiana, we grow a lot of strawberries. That area is kind of known for it. And real good friends with the guy out of Mississippi that makes a very good blueberry wine that you can eat with a steak. So trying to think of something new and kind of innovative, maybe no one else is doing it, that to bring to that specific T Moon bottle for our anniversary. Called him up and said, "Hey, would you be willing to make this strawberry wine barrel for me?" And he said, "Absolutely." So that's kind of how it grew from there. And he sent me pictures actually this week of the strawberry wine, and oh, does it look good! So heading up there next week to deliver the barrel and dump the wine in it with him, and excited to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. There's so much. Everything that you've mentioned today is something I would love to try. Honestly, that comes from. I mean, the 3 products you sent me are really good products, and that's enough to convince me. I want to see what you can come up with. It's really cool to me that, like, so we opened this by saying, hey, this single malt, really exciting, first official label of single malt of American Single Malt Whiskey, but it's discontinued. But discontinued or not, it's not discontinued as a product. It's out of production. It's no longer coming off the stills, and yet you are doing a lot to make these products that are not coming off the stills anymore into the best thing that they can be 2-3 years down the line. So just because a product is not being currently produced doesn't mean that it's forgotten, and there's still really cool stuff that can come out of it. And again, if everybody loves what you do and we buy a whole lot of it faster than you think, maybe we'll convince you to put it back in production.
I'll never say never, right? And kind of on that note, what maybe some of you may have seen or not seen on our Instagram is one thing is what I realized. So I'm not just a distiller and a distillery owner, but I'm a bourbon lover. I follow other distilleries. I love what they put out, and I think kind of what I see with the public as well as myself is too many questions. I want transparency, right? So I actually tried to open that up, a couple of years ago, just being too open, too honest. Here's what I'm doing. Whereas, there may be no knock on this, but there may be some distilleries that may make an experimental whiskey and not say anything about it. You may not hear anything. I wanted people to start terms and say, here's what we're doing at the distillery. So a few years ago, I started a whole experimental line where it's different grains, that maybe I've never used before, maybe certain mash bills that I've never put together. For instance, I've never made a traditional bourbon mash bill, corn, rye, and wheat. Talk about some of the other mash bills that I have, but really having a lot of fun with this experimental whiskey. I'm doing one actually right now this week where our malt company out of Fort Worth, Texas, gave me a call a few weeks ago and said, hey, we had a distillery kind of back out on a lot of malted white corn. And your name first came first to my mind because I know your whole experimental line that you're starting with. Would you want some? I'll give you a really good deal on it. And my wheels started spinning. So I actually put that into production just for the experimental whiskey this week. And it's 52% malted white corn, 43% rye, bringing that spice to the corn, and then 5% malted barley. But playing with different grains, use some Bloody Butcher red corn with some malted rye, use some Triticale, blue corn with some honey malted oats, chocolate malted rye. What else? Looking at some Oaxacan green corn. I did so our traditional rye mash bill, which we can get into, is mainly rye, has 20% corn, Louisiana corn, to bring in that sweetness, and then 13% malted barley. Well, I decided to put a different flip on that into our experimentals to make a wheated rye. So take out the 20% corn, put 20% wheat in it. That higher wheat percentage makes it a wheated. So why not? I've never heard of one before. So that's kind of what it is. That's what it's all about. I've never heard of it. Come up with something cool, but also some that exists. Into the summer, make an American light whiskey, and it's going into the barrel, into a couple of non-charred barrels and a couple of used barrels, because that's the 2 designations that you can use for light whiskey. And they're going to go in a barrel around 160 proof. So we'll kind of see what those whiskeys do. But yeah, everyone's different and having a lot of fun with it. So really, if there's someone listening right here, and if ever there was a thought in your brain in the past or coming up right now, and you have a crazy mash bill that you think you want to make, hit me up. Shoot us a message on this chat and let us know. I may actually make it.
Yeah, something that crossed my mind is you could probably just barely see it right there, peek it out on the top of my top shelf, Talnua from near Denver, Colorado. They make an Irish style poitín, which is usually made. It's like a whiskey new make, but it's or sorry, they don't make a poitín, but they poitín uses the same sort of mash bill. What they make is the Irish style Irish pot still whiskey. And for that, they're using sometimes they're using oats and that sort of thing, but usually malted and unmalted barley. So there's some ideas in that vein potentially. If you want to go listen to our interview with Killowen Distillery, the Irish single malt, and they also make poitín and single pot still. They're bringing back the old recipes, so he's got a lot of interesting mash bills there that involve oats and some peated barley and all sorts of interesting stuff. They have like no restrictions. Certain distillers have no restrictions on what mash bill they want to do. It's just, is this going to taste good? And I think you're going to have a lot in common with that guy. So that would be a fun watch for you. You might get some inspiration from there. And as for Talnua, that's in my backlog of I'd love to have them on the show. I just need to get a connection to the distillery.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd love to talk to them. And you mentioned oats. Oats is actually going into a couple of our experimentals because oats will bring in a lot of legs to your whiskey and brings in a unique flavor to it. So most definitely going with some oats as well. But Triticale might have been it's hard to say what's my favorite so far. Triticale was such a unique grain that I've never experienced in my life. Where if those of you who don't know what it is, it's a hybrid between rye and wheat. But you don't get the exact same spice out of rye or the mellowness out of wheat. When I mashed this, I think I did a 70% Triticale with, I can't remember at this point, maybe 20% wheat and 10% malted barley. But the mash tasted like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And it followed through on the distillate. So I'm so excited to see kind of now the barrel's going to impact it, and it's going to be fun to see what happens with some of these experimentals and when they're ready to release. To be honest.
So my experience with Triticale is the dry fly, and if I remember right, it reminded me of Watermelon Jolly Ranchers a little bit.
Oh wow!
So Cinnamon Toast Crunch is a completely different weird direction, but it's a grain that you don't know what to expect from because there's so few products. But it's definitely interesting, has potential. I mean, yeah, hybrid of rye and wheat, you would think like, hey, that makes sense. I would know what to expect from that, but not necessarily. Sometimes it just comes out different.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that either. But there's so many factors that come into play. You know, the water you're using, the type of equipment you're using, your yeast. I mean, you can go on and on for a couple of hours on you deviate from one of those processes, even the slightest, and you have a different product.
Sorry, you guys are probably hearing my WhatsApp go in the background because my laptop over there is binging as my dog wants to be fed, and currently she's not in my room, so I'm asking my wife to come grab her. Yeah, once upon a time, someone first paired peanut butter with jelly, and before that, nobody knew that would be a winning combination. So exactly, Sean. We have a Laissez le bon temps relais from Donut Fish.
Good time, Joel.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the experimentalism here. This like and I want to hammer home that like just because like, hey, T Moon is, and that's the letter T Moon, by the way,
yes.
not T as in like there's tea in this product, but and I'd love you to tell me why that name. But to make the point, just because it's not whiskey and it's not rum doesn't mean it's not a good spirit. It's just something that we don't have a name for. It's something that other people are not making. So it is pretty cool. I mean, if you're thinking whiskey, this tastes like rum. If you're thinking rum, this tastes like whiskey. It really is just a marriage of the two. Just instead of it being like a blend of whiskey and rum, it was distilled together.
Yeah, the only other designation that I could have given it, which I thought was even more confusion was a true designation of DSS, Distilled
Right.
Spirit Specialty. And I think there's more people than not that have no idea what that is. But by me saying it's spirits distilled from grain to cane, at least you know ish more what it is compared to just saying distilled spirit specialty.
Yeah.
But yeah. So every one of our names kind of come. There's a lot of thought that goes behind our names. T Moon is a fun one where, if you think about it, back in the day when people were distilling illegally, they didn't do it during the middle of the day. They did it at night under a little T Moon. So because it's not exactly a whiskey, it's not really a moonshine, doesn't fit into designation. That's kind of where I got the play on words with that name. And so T in here in Louisiana means little. And we'll call, T boy, little boy, or T this or T that as a prefix to another word. So it's kind of bringing our culture into that name as well.
Okay, that's cute. And then you've got the little crescent moon on the label as part of the. So,
and if you look closely, it's a little bit harder to see with the blue label, but right under the T Moon, there's a guy in the cypress trees in his pirogue with a couple of barrels on the front of his pirogue. That is actually a real picture of my dad.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't think it's even showing up well on camera, but
yeah, you can kind of see it.
Yeah, so there's the boat down there, and the man in the boat, and then the trees in the background.
And then it's even harder to see on the blue label, but that picture of the man in the boat, if you look at the outline behind it, it's in the shape of Louisiana.
Oh yeah, okay, that is very subtle. That's very cool.
Yeah, so that was one of our funner labels to come up with. Sad to see when it goes, but quite honestly, when you have a product that's a hand sales get tiring, and seeing that the industry is more going to whiskeys and bourbons, that's kind of where we want to lie.
So we have a question from the chat from Germ Freedom Malts. Do you also dabble in or make a rum?
No. So we have a lot of rum distilleries here in Louisiana. We didn't want to play in the backyard. Let them have their thing. We have enough on our plate, as you can kind of hear me keep talking. We're not gonna make a rum and not gonna make not tequila, obviously, but a agave spirit either.
All right, as long as we're doing chat questions. So that other YouTuber you mentioned, was that Bruzel?
That actually wasn't Bruzel, but
it wasn't Bruzel. Okay.
No, but speaking of Bruzel, if anyone is a Patreon member of his, I just sent off. So in that video, he picked 2 single malt barrels. Well, it took us a while to get online with the other online distributor that I was talking about. It got shipped out yesterday, finally. So that's going to hit their warehouse probably tomorrow-ish. Not sure how long they're going to take to actually put up on the site, but that'll be his single barrels of the single malt that we do have. And
so the part of this question here,
T Moon pick as well. So we'll see about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously everyone knows about Bruzel. If you hang out on whiskey YouTube intentionally, I guess you know about Bruzel. So from the video of that visit, I guess we saw the warehouse. I haven't seen that video personally. So the question is, are there more American single malt whiskey barrels than in that warehouse or outside of that warehouse? And how many gallons were those smaller barrels that had the American single malt in it?
No, that is the last of the single malt that we do have. So like I said, if anyone's interested in here, y'all shoot me a message and let me know. But so those are 10-gallon barrels. And we'll get into that as well, how we're transitioning out of the small barrels. But those barrels have been aging for 3+ years, 3 to 3.5 years in those smaller 10-gallon barrels. Now it's used bourbon barrels. So whenever we dump, we typically yield around 40 bottles. Those specific single barrels that he picked, one yielded 40, one yielded 41 bottles, and that was it.
Yeah. Okay. So real small. So when we say 2 years of American single malt left, what is that assuming in terms of rate of sales?
Well, that's when I say it's more like a year to year and a half, but sales here in the South are so bad. It depends. It depends if groups come in and want to do picks. It depends how Colorado works out, and if we start moving some single malt up there. I mean, we have been sitting on single malt, which is why I keep saying we're taking it out of production.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense.
So that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, it's like we want to know why, we want to know how much of a chance we have, right? Everybody's got FOMO right now, I think, especially people who've tried it. I know Coming Whiskey, Freedom Malts, everyone I know that's had a sample of this is like, wow, this is really good. It's a shame it's going out of production.
Yeah, so and even some of these groups are y'all groups that maybe you're smaller, maybe you can't fulfill a whole barrel that's maybe 200-ish bottles or whatnot. That's where these come into play perfectly. Maybe you have a group of 20 or 40 guys, and each guy pick up 1 or 2 bottles. That's a barrel right there.
Yep.
And I've even had groups do 2 and or 3 barrel blends as well. One of the best bourbons I've ever put out for single barrel was a 3 barrel blend of 3 different barrels that we had.
Okay, nice. Do you do like half size bottles too? So like a compromise on like number of bottles versus the size of the barrel?
We haven't yet. We haven't introduced any 375s yet. Kind of maybe looking at that for potentially our experimentals, depending kind of how much interest we have out of it and all that. Look, we're still a smaller distillery. So when we do a special release, we're not a bigger boy distillery, or even like I'm not sure if y'all familiar with Still Austin out of Texas, or Garrison Brothers. I mean, they have people lined up 24 hours in advance. We don't have that type of backing yet. So to say I'm going to go down to 375 is kind of hard to make that distinction yet. Now, if it comes out where people are really liking the whiskey that we're having out, we have people start waiting, they can't get bottles. That's when we're going to start introducing either some larger barrel batch sizes and or smaller bottles with the 375s.
All right, cool. So yeah, keep living on that FOMO, guys. It's time to do some barrel picks, is what I'm hearing. Yeah, Freedom Malts need some single malt from you, and Carrie says the same. I know Carrie's also a huge. These guys are all huge fans of American Single Malt. I mean, that's why they're in my chat. So
nice.
Thanks, welcome in, guys. And I don't know if I greeted Carrie. Carrie, good to have you here. Okay, we've been talking about we can't avoid talking about the single malt. We've been talking about it, so I feel like we should move on to that next. But before we sort of wrap up the conversation on T Moon, I feel like I want to do some tasting notes of some sort, or just to sort of like give a feel for. So first of all, I can see why this is something you can hand sell, right? When you say hand sell, I imagine it's you the one doing the talking.
Yeah.
So, there's something about when you describe tasting notes as food, and coming from like a Cajun background, there's something about the Cajun passion for food that just comes out. I mean, I love making, my dad has some Cajun recipes, and I love making that at home, and Cajun food is lovely, but there's something about that passion for food. And so when you bring in those cool food tasting notes, it's just like, oh, I gotta have that. How could I not buy that? It makes sense that it's easy for you to hand sell stuff, especially when it's you talking, when it's you doing the selling and not the label doing the talking. And a label, I mean, frankly, hey, the reason we wanted American Single Malt Whiskey to have a regulation, and by we, I mean the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, and also fans, is because it was confusing to have whiskey distilled from a fermented mash of Scottish peat malted barley aged in Oregon oak, or something along those lines, which is the longest expression I've seen of a type on McCarthy's, which is out of frame on this cropped frame, but regulars know where it is. Spirits distilled from grain and cane and finished on charred oak planks is like, so is that bourbon or what is the question, right? It's hard for a label to sell a product like that. But when you're in front of the people and you've got it in their glass and you're telling them what you think it tastes like and your inspiration for that, it's super easy to sell products like that. It's one of the reasons that I like doing this podcast, is because I think that people sell products rather than labels selling products. I know that people like to look at a pretty bottle on the shelf and they'll buy bottles for looking pretty, but not everybody can have a pretty bottle that's going to appeal to everybody. And I personally think you're a lot more likely to resonate with hearing the story of the person who made it and hearing what they think about it, and then say, I want that because the person who made it convinced me it's something worth trying. I think that's a great way to sell product. So that's the service I'm trying to provide here, is to get people's faces out so more people can see it. And I mean, the next trick is, where can I buy it? So we've answered that question earlier. So I sort of said, like, yeah, I mean, whiskey, maybe it's just the power of suggestion. Yeah, we're selling them right now. Exactly. And I don't know if the you was meant to be the plural you or just Philip, but either way.
No, you did a good job. And what I like to tell people, I've had people come into the distillery and say, "Oh, well, we could," because I go through the whole line. We make a vodka, we make a gin, then we get the Tea Moon, where it's a bit light. Then you kind of ramp your way up to some of the bigger, bolder products that we have. And had one person come in, and we're starting to get to the brown liquor set, and oh, I don't like whiskey. I said, great, this is not whiskey. Go ahead and give it a try, and they actually liked it. And I got to tell the story where you're going to get kind of just sweeter bread notes from this one. You'll get I don't even want to say it's a rum finish on it. However, whenever I did start double oaking this in our bourbon barrels, it transformed the spirit to more of a rum finished bourbon, even though it has nothing to do with any of those whatsoever products. But that's kind of where it transformed that specific product.
By the way, while I think about tasting notes, here's another inspiration. So Balcones Rumble is, I thought there was sugar in it, which is why I asked chat to look that up for me, is made with honey, turbinado sugar, and fig. So that's a distilled spirit that's pretty unusual. There's no name for that for sure.
So I imagine they would have to call it a DSS, distilled spirit specialty.
Yep. Right. So that's, I think, distilled spirit specialty. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think if I looked up this label, I'd probably find distilled spirit specialty on the cola. Right? I think that's just what.
Yes. Yeah, you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just that nobody's going to put that on the bottle, because distilled spirit specialties always have the so-called fanciful name, which is way better, but still has to be descriptive. So yeah, unfortunately, the descriptive name here is still a mouthful.
It is. Well, that's why we're starting to, have these talks with individuals and groups and show them kind of what this product is, but how we can also individually highlight it for that specific group. You want to do a cigar blend with it, we can try that out and see what happens with it. Maybe finish it with certain woods and see what comes out of that as well.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a little more detail about the charred oak planks, the finished on charred oak planks detail. So am I to understand that this was partially aged in a barrel and then partially aged with just barrel staves, or what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so with barrel staves, we get some brand new white American oak and we toast and char ourselves. That'll go for around 4.5 years or so, and then we'll start to finish it from there. But we normally char to heavy toast, heavy char. That way you get that heavy barrel impact. But even now, I see your nose in it right now, you don't get that heavy oak impact coming from it.
Yeah, I am looking for it. I'm looking for the oak. So it's got this sweetness at first. It doesn't have like the sort of typical bourbon notes of like caramel, cherry, not that sort of thing. If anything, the sweetness is sort of run by more rum-like notes, where it's that sort of like light tropical fruit juice kind of feel, like maybe a little bit of pear in there. There's some maybe clove or something like that. There's something aromatic dessert spice kind of going on here. Not necessarily cinnamon. And then there is the layers of wood underneath. It's a little bit chocolatey, but the biggest thing that's coming out is just a black tea. Just like something like, nothing too crazy or specific, just like a Lipton black tea, something like.
Yeah, and that's a good bottle as well, because for a couple of reasons. On certain days, say I don't want a big bowl bourbon. Makes me sound like I drink every single day. But I'll go after Tea Moon, because you can see it's a lot easier, it's a lot lighter. So I'll go after that. But it's such a kind of product where you can sip it neat, you can do it on the rocks, but it also holds up to a cocktail very well. Very well. I make a cocktail with it. It's a riff off of Manhattan, and we call it a Manhattan because I make my own red pepper coriander simple syrup. So it brings a little bit of spice because us Louisianans, we love our spice. So it takes that Manhattan, kind of bumps it up a notch, but then that sweetness shines through a bit still with the T-Moon. So it makes a really, really good cocktail. Normally when we make it for dinners or events, it's normally the crowd pleaser.
I could definitely see this as a substitute in like a rum, like an aged rum old fashioned. Like, I mean, it's just an old fashioned, but like putting it in the context of making like a rum old fashioned, or even like a split base spirit old fashioned. Like, why get a whiskey and a rum which are going to fight with each other when you could instead have something that gives you the best of both and is already a complete product?
Yeah, and especially if you're going to mix it as well, that's a cheap bottle that you have right there. It's a $30 bottle.
Mm-hmm. That's a great price point, and definitely worth calling out, because most of what appears on my podcast is $60 to $100 a bottle is kind of the price range that American Single Malt Whiskey tends to live in. So it is always worth calling out when there's something that we're talking about that's a little bit on the lower side. Yeah.
So I saw a comment. I want to address that for Joe's Whiskey Den, right above that one. He was asking if we have any mash bills and details of our spirits on our website. Yes, we do. So if you go into our spirits, you go through each one of the products that we make. It has the mash bill that we have on it. And if you even go to the section that's coming soon, that's all of our experimentals with the exact mash bills for every one of those. So if I am missing something, let me know. Reach out to me and tell me. I try to be as transparent as I can with it. Yeah, so everything should be on our website for every one of our products.
Yeah, welcome in, Whiskey Shaman. I saw you on Instagram. Also didn't look like you had asked a question, so glad you're here, though. It's definitely easier to keep track of YouTube chat. Everybody's greeting each other. That's what, what if I put the chat on screen? You guys can be on screen now. Now you can partly cover up my face over here. Because we did that last time. Let's see how this goes when our faces are bigger on stream. This is a new feature of StreamYard that we're playing with. I think this is a great observation, Germ. And this is basically, it's another way of saying the point that I was trying to make here. T-Moon and the ASM from Distillerie Acadian. I'm super self-conscious about how I'm saying it. This distillery knows what sells in that market, has tried a lot of experimental stuff, doesn't necessarily sell super well in the target market, which is super local. And then you have to make the hard decision for the future of the distillery, because this distillery is going to last. It's a question of which products take it to the future.
Well, let's hope so. But you're right. I mean, right now I'm currently planning out to 2032. Everything that I'm making right now is going out to that, and some barrels even older than that. So I'm trying to be a mind and a market reader here to see where I think it's going to go. I know you and I had that conversation where American Single Malt's the next big thing, and I'm making the comment I don't see it. But then I also get surprised. We see some distilleries move to almost all single malt, and then you also have some of these large distilleries coming out with a single malt. I saw another one come out this week, that a large distillery that shocked me that they're coming out with a single malt.
Was that Woodford?
It was Woodford.
Yep. What's interesting is that so far what I've seen of those labels is it kind of suggests that single malt's not distilled at Woodford. That could be wrong. But something about the verbiage on the last, I didn't look at this week's label too closely, but it was just a higher age statement on the same thing that came out a couple of months ago. And the wording on that one seemed to suggest they were trying really hard to say not distilled at this particular distillery. And I've heard from other people in the industry a theory that even though Woodford makes a malt whiskey, 51% malt and 49% corn, or whatever it is, 5%, whatever. I forget what the mash bill is, but they make a 51% malted barley malt whiskey aged on new oak. And
which
even
is
though
no
they have
longer
that
single malt.
It's not single malt. It's an American malt whiskey. It's the old definition, which still
Yeah,
exists. That
right.
definition is still alive and
Yeah,
well.
that was probably one of the biggest changes to the American single malt designation, where they made it be 100% malted barley, whereas before it just had to be 51%. So that was a big change.
Yep. There was two ways people were making American single malt whiskey. One was generic whiskey category, right? We said, and the reason why, and this is partly it's what do you apply for a label for, partly it's what do you qualify for. There's two kinds of American single malt whiskey that's 100% malted barley. One is it's aged in new oak, and the other is it's not aged in new oak. The one that's aged in new oak qualifies for American malt whiskey, and then more specifically, it qualifies as American single malt whiskey now. And the one that's not aged in new oak is just whiskey. There's no, besides American single malt whiskey, which is now a category, but before that, there was no category of whiskey that it fit into. Unless they had done something like distill it to a super high proof, and then it could be light whiskey, but you're still not getting credit for 100% malted barley in that. So those are the two ways to be American single malt whiskey. What I'm told by people who have more technical knowledge than I do is that working with 100% malt mash bill requires different equipment, has foaming problems, that sort of thing, where if you're set up to make industrial quantities of bourbon, rye, malt whiskey, whatever, your equipment's set up a certain way and you don't have like the craft scale to tend to it necessarily. So switching to 100% malted barley would be a challenge for an operation like Woodford. Not to say they couldn't do it, but that it just doesn't seem super likely that they would do it in-house with the same equipment. Now, I know that there's a lot of supposition there. My personal take before I got that information was Woodford already has a malt whiskey product. Why wouldn't they extend into American single malt whiskey? It feels more obvious for them than it felt for Beam making Claremont Steep, or that it necessarily felt for Bullet, but Bullet's sourced anyway. There's a lot of these big brands that are coming out with American single malt whiskey. A lot of them are not distilled at the same premise as the bourbon, for example.
Yeah, and I can't speak for their specific equipment. Like I've heard from other distillers, oats is very hard on a column still. I could be wrong on that. That's just what I'm told. Maybe there is something with 100% malted barley as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's absolutely more consideration that you need to have with American single malt. One of the first single malt mashes that I've ever done, I put into the fermenter, had a very good conversion on it, probably the highest conversion I've ever had. And it was super, super easy to work with. Well, leave for the day, come back the next day, and foaming issues in my fermenter, and my entire fermentation room was covered in single malt throughout the walls and the floors and everywhere. And kind of went back to the drawing board and said, all right, let me figure out how to work with this. And I got actually very, very good with it. So it's sad that I say I take it out of production, because it's my funnest grain to work with. 100% malted barley is incredible. And the smells coming off of that mash tun is kind of where it's at. But yeah, you do need certain consideration. Now on that label, I want to make a comment. That was probably one of the most confusing parts to me. I did like to see that it moved from the 51% to the 100% malted barley. But the most confusing part to me was that it can either be used barrels or it could be brand new barrels. Whereas any other product, bourbon has to be a brand new barrel. But if you use a used barrel, you can use the used barrel. But then you cannot call it bourbon. Now you have to say whiskey distilled from bourbon mash, or whiskey distilled from rye mash instead of a straight rye whiskey. So that was kind of the most eye-opening piece of that designation, where I maybe didn't quite understand the reasoning behind that. But it definitely was interesting to see that.
So I would say I could see that. It feels like a major change. I think you're right that in my personal opinion, that is the biggest change. The biggest departure from other styles of whiskey is the fact that we now have a whiskey that is allowed to be aged in used casks. Corn whiskey and light whiskey, I think, had that ability before, but those were a lot less popular whiskey. Most people don't really think about them. So in terms of the whiskey that has the mind share, we're talking bourbon, rye, to some extent wheat whiskey, to some small extent malt whiskey. There were really not very many 51% malted barley, the old malt whiskey designation. There were not very many of that product on the market. Woodford Reserve is the only one I can readily call to mind. So among all of those products, the fact that they're all new oak or they're not that thing anymore just feels like a foregone conclusion. But in the world of single malt, and I emphasize the world, single malt whiskey the world over, Scotland, Ireland, Japan, India, Australia, using used casks is almost the default choice, because what happens with bourbon casks when they're emptied? They can't be used for bourbon anymore. So they end up going somewhere else. It's Scotland, it's Ireland, it's Japan, wherever there's a market for, we need a barrel. It doesn't need to be a new barrel. And so most of the rest of the world is making whiskey with refilled bourbon or sherry barrels, basically, is the sort of tradition there. And so bringing that tradition home back to the United States, where, we, as nationalist as we are, say the rest of the world is making this cool thing called single malt. We can make that too. We're going to make great single malt. But we don't want to limit ourselves by saying it has to be new oak. We should be able to play with that whole category. And so it makes sense in a world context that we should be adding that used cask allowance. Not to mention, if you make bourbon, now you can use your own bourbon casks to make another product. So that's actually economical for the distillery. We have yet to see economical translate into better prices for customers, for the most part. That's with a notable exception of Virginia Distillery right up there behind me, where all of those products are ex-bourbon casks. Not their own bourbon. They don't make bourbon, but they have a partnership with Brown-Forman. So they are getting bourbon casks, and they're pricing accordingly. They've got a good pipeline to make that cost effective. Not everybody does. The used cask thing, it's huge, right? It is a huge difference.
Well, it is, and that again, saying that was the most confusing part of it. The only thing I wish, because you could tell, I've said this maybe 3 or 4 times, is transparency. I just wish there would have been maybe a subsection of it, or maybe make you say it on the label. Is this used or brand new barrels? American light whiskey, you said it just now, that that's another category where you can use either uncharred or used barrels as well. But yeah, I mean, so back in the day, on that point that you made, we started dumping our bourbon barrels and said, we had so few back in the day. What are we going to do with this? I can't go off and sell this few barrels to, companies or whatnot. So that's whenever we came out with, hey, let's make a single malt. And we did a little test run and kind of let it age and really blew us away. So we put that into production. Then whenever we start to sell it, then we kind of took a pause and said, maybe we need to, go away from, not necessarily go away from it, but we were putting other SKUs into production. So we've been making a wheated bourbon as well as a rye whiskey. And so we kind of had to make the determination. You can't make everything, right? Which is another reason someone asked, are you going to make rum? No, we have our hands full. But you can't make everything. You kind of have to define your distillery. And that's what we envisioned, was more of a rye whiskey bourbon shop. Moving forward with maybe some fun experimentals and things of those natures.
So we got another rules question here. Does light whiskey even have to be in a barrel? And I'm just going to say, now's a great time for me to plug the Whiskey Lodge Discord, which I don't do often enough. Or maybe, I mean, I do in a sense, but like, how often do I actually post this link? That is a deeper rules question that I feel like takes us far off the path of the interview. And since we've got about a half hour left, I'm going to instead say, find me in the Whiskey Lodge and ask me that question. That's we'd love to get geeky with the rules. So the Whiskey Lodge Discord link is in the chat. So feel free to join. Cool. Yeah, we've only gotten through one whiskey so far. We've talked about the American Single Malt plenty. I've just about finished my glass of Tea Moon. So one last thing is, there's a note I've been struggling to name in this, which I think is like milk chocolate with toffee in it.
I don't get much milk chocolate from the Moon. Once you get a sip of that Bon Vale single malt, you'll get heavy kind of milk chocolate, some dark chocolates on that one. But yeah, you will get a little bit of toffee coming out of that one.
Okay, maybe I'm just focusing on the toffee, and like the only time I get toffee is in like these Hershey's bars that has the little toffee chunks in them. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we were talking about, Carrie. The Woodford announced the 12-year 100% malted barley, and my theory that I have not substantiated yet is that's actually probably distilled somewhere else, just like the label they released a couple months ago. But we'll see. I'm really curious. You know, I'd love to have any big brand talk to me on this podcast. So if anyone has a connection, Brown-Forman, Beam, Woodford, whoever, would love to get the perspective of a big producer who's gone from making worldwide bourbon to making experimental American single malt. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there was a little bit of both. I was rambling a little bit. I apologize. Phil keeps me on track. I have to remember to self-regulate my excitement. So Woodford does make a 51% malt whiskey, which has existed for years and years. They also have released cola label approvals for 100% malted barley whiskey labeled American single malt. So we're seeing that too. It's just a question of where is it distilled, or is it different equipment, or what? We're not sure yet. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on finally to actually tasting the American single malt, because that's what we're here to talk about. So thanks everybody who has been hanging in for an hour waiting for us to finally actually talk about this for real. Wow. Okay. So coming from I love when I get multiple samples from a brand, because I get a chance to try them in all different orders. And I have never gone from the Tea Moon to the single malt so far. I've gone from the bourbon to the single malt. I've started with the single malt. I'm getting a ton of like peanut brittle on this. That is what just jumps out of the glass, and some that's toffee. I mean, yeah, peanut brittle. So let's get into some specific about how this was made. So you talked about you had some challenges with the 100% malted barley in the vat. What sort of formulation have you settled on, or did you settle on, that made this possible?
Yeah, so in the beginning, we played a lot with the mash temperatures to see what worked best with 100% malted barley. Again, malted barley is very easy to work with within a mash tun, but seeing not only workability, but also kind of flavor profiles coming of it. So kind of backed off on some of the temperatures coming out of the mash tun for making that, and then also incorporating a defoamer into the ferment was probably our biggest aha moment whenever we stopped overcoming our fermenters and have it on the ground. But kind of in the beginning, whenever we're deciding to potentially even make a single malt, one, we really weren't getting other types of grains like we are now and experimenting with different things. So what we decided as our first test, well, let's try to just use this distiller's malt, this 6-row distiller's malt, to make a American single malt and see kind of what comes out of it. And that's what I was saying earlier, where we were a bit blown away on the first initial test run and ended up putting into production. So this is made with grains and others that we've already had on hand. So the 6-row distiller's malt that we're using for our bourbon and all of our other whiskeys, the same distiller's yeast that we're using for all of our other whiskeys as well. Now, like I say, never. Coming to the experimentals, we're gonna put in a single malt or a few single malts into that experimental. But not only we're playing with different types of malted barley, but different yeasts as well. So I said earlier, whenever our malt company told us that they had all of that malted white corn, that we ended up picking some up and putting in our experimental, I said, hey, well, I got you. I'm thinking about doing this. I'm thinking about putting a single malt into the experimental. Is there any certain mash bill or certain types of special malts that y'all have or seen or ever want to try? And their wheels started spinning. So kind of working with them at this point to see what kind of profile do we want to go after, not only with grains, temperatures, but also yeast as well. And then ending in that, like one of the biggest suggestions that they had, because we're building this mash bill, kind of the profile that we want, kind of looking at specific yeast that we want for this one project. But they said put it in a used barrel is what they specifically said. And knowing kind of what I know now with single malt as well, I wholeheartedly agree, because when we first started putting out our single malt, which is going to be kind of more in the bigger squarish bottle, that was from our used bourbon barrels that was not aged as long as they are now. So now you'll see kind of our single malts coming out there, a lighter color, but you kind of get less barrel impact and more of the actual grain shining through. You get some of that milk chocolate shining through, and I honestly a lot more pleasant. So I wholeheartedly agree with that used barrel moving forward for our single malts at least. Because again, going back and making a full circle, Louisiana is different. We have to have different considerations for the whiskey that we're putting out and the specific profiles that we're going after.
So about how old is the sample that I have?
That's going to be around 3.2 years, almost 3.5 years. Now that's going to be in our smaller 10-gallon bourbon barrels.
Yep. I honestly doesn't taste like a small barrel, right? Small barrel, usually I think of lots of extraction in a short amount of time. It's not necessarily astringent. I mean, look at Whiskey Del Bach, surprisingly soft for their tiny barrels. But somehow the combination of tiny barrel and 3.5 years does not add up to this soft flavor profile that I'm getting from this, which is, I mean, it's excellent, right?
Well, and again, that's because of Louisiana, because we extracted most of that with our initial bourbons, and it's once we get to drinking that bourbon, we'll explain kind of what we're doing with the smaller barrels to the bigger barrels. But yeah, we've already extracted most out of it, just as if let's say a larger bourbon barrel goes to Scotland. We can't use it for bourbon anymore. Well, how long was that bourbon aged for? Was it a 4-year, just straight up bottled and bond, or was it a 23-year? Right, it's going to be a completely different barrel going to that final product, and you have to be mindful of that as well, which I've learned now. And now I'm glad I learned this lesson, because when I first dumped one of these barrels, I saw the color and said, "What is going on?" And then I remember back, look at my notes, and seeing that. But you have to be mindful of that on the product that you're going after, because you could get a used barrel. So you go down that route. Well, what was in it before? Was it a rye whiskey? Was it a bourbon? Was it a distilled spirit specialty? Whatever it may be, how long was that aged for? What's the extraction, and where are you at? Is this used barrel going to Scotland? Is it going to Louisiana? Because we're not the same.
Right. Yeah. So that brings back to this, to the point about we should delineate new versus used oak. I never thought about that before. I actually think it's a really good point. I don't know how you'd write that into the rules. If you actually look at what they changed in the rules when the American Single Malt Whiskey got ratified, they added a paragraph and a line in a table. Actually, 2 lines in a table, because we got the straight American Single Malt Whiskey as well, which we weren't expecting from the proposal. But yeah, so a paragraph, 2 lines in a table, and the verbiage on it is so slim. And so when we break down like the thing that the American Single Malt Commission wanted American Single Malt to be, and then see what actually came out in the rules, it's actually that what they wrote came really close to what American whiskey was, except for a couple of exceptions, and they just basically wrote down the exceptions. To say you have to specify whether it's new or used oak, I would love that from a transparency perspective. How to write that into the rules, how to get that onto bottles in an attractive way, because labels not only have to be descriptive, they also have to be attractive. And so the more words you put on it, right, like the T Moon, the less people you lose people, right? After like 3 words on the label of what is this product, people just tune out.
Well, and it just depends how you write into the regulations. Again, I would agree as well. I wish that would be in a designation, not as a distiller, as a consumer. I want to see that, right? So you can write it specific ways into the regulation to where, you know, there's certain pieces of your label that has to be in certain places. You know, the designation has to be on the front. It has to be in the same size text, you know, across all words. But for bourbon, if a bourbon is aged under 4 years, you have to have an age statement, or you have to say it was aged at least this amount of years. That doesn't have to be on the front. And more times than not, it's actually on the back. So you can write it into the regulations to where, let's say it's right above or right below that, aged at least 3 years, and then right under it, used barrels, or however you want to have that designation named.
I could see that working. I'm still, I think, in Freedom Malt's camp here. As much as I would love that rule for transparency, I think letting people be transparent, right? For example, to finish Freedom Malt's comment for the verbal, Freedom Malt says, as much as I would love that to be a rule, I think it would do more harm than good. I basically agree with that point. Yeah, I think, and you get a lot of rules Naziing too. I should stop using that term. That's a loaded term now. You get a lot of rules lawyering too, where people are like, "Oh, you're supposed to say such and such," and just because it's, you know, people freak out when the age statement is on the back label. Like, I know there's a lot of geeks who are like, "Oh, they said straight, but there's no age statement, and it's not bottled in bond, so technically that has to be written on the label somewhere because it's not 4 years old." And the back label doesn't seem transparent enough, and yada, yada, yada. And people get all upset about products that are perfectly fine just because they think the rules mean a certain thing and TTB didn't. And yeah, I could see it going more that way, where people are like, oh, it's not, you know, you did this, it's not transparent enough. On the other hand, so, and back to this point, delineating newer used oak is not the only major sea change of flavor profile. And I would even argue new versus used oak has a lot of overlap with just where you age and the toast level on the, so
the toast in the char is huge, right?
We're talking about this product is super soft and it's not new oak. So that's maybe not making my point particularly well, but Westward is aged primary aging exclusively in new oak. And a lot of their products don't taste that strong of oak. You wouldn't necessarily know that.
They're out of Portland, right?
They're in Portland, yeah.
Yeah. Now that has an impact on as well, but agree, back to the toast in the jar, you know, not only the, you know, where you're located in the world, but also that has a major impact, you know. And what we're looking at with all of our whiskeys and bourbon, or most of them, we are still playing with different cooperages, different chars, different toasts. But one that we really like is coming out of Kelvin, which is a medium toast char number 3. We love the kind of vanillas and caramels and almost coconut coming out of those medium toast barrels. Yep. They hold up really well to our hot climate, because that has to be a consideration as well. They're just a very, very good barrel and produce some exceptional whiskeys.
Kelvin Char number 3 is also used by Andalusia whiskey. So I know there's some people in the chat who are fans of Andalusia. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a mix. I think they do ISC and Kelvin. A lot of distilleries do both. ISC is an independent stave company, by the way. For the audience, in case anyone doesn't know, I feel like this geeky of an audience probably knows the big barrel brokers: Kelvin, ISC, Oregon Barrel Works. I keep calling out Germ. Not just Germ though. The whiskey shaman's here, right? So yeah, but it's not targeting you, because I agree with you. Andalusia is great whiskey. In fact, I just bought 2 new bottles of Lost Lantern Andalusia. That's my easiest way of getting Andalusia whiskey is Lost Lantern. So yeah. And I'm trying to remember if it's ISC or Kelvin that Westward uses, actually, because I know most of their barrels are char number 3, char number 2 or char number 3. So they're also going with a light char. There's just so many decisions that go in, and so saying that like it would be to delineate new or used oak suggests a sea change, or suggests a strong delineation in what these products are. But I think there's actually a lot of overlap. Things where I think it's a lot more obvious that there's a major flavor difference, though. We've talked before at length about hopped whiskey versus not, and leaving aside whether that should be legal or what category it should actually fall under. I'm happy calling it a whiskey. I just think it should be written on the label, because a hopped whiskey tastes clearly different from an unhopped whiskey. And it's along the same lines as peat, right? And if we were going to say we have to put new or used oak on a label, that would be like saying you have to put peat or not peat, peated or not peated on a label. Or if you're doing any kind of smoking on the barley, you have to say it somewhere on the label: mesquite smoked barley, peat smoked barley, because those are huge delineation differences in flavor that you couldn't just, like there's other places smoke could come from, right? Or there's other places that a sappy flavor could come from. I don't know. I feel like if your oak is giving you a sappy flavor to the degree that hops would give you a kind of a sappy flavor, sweet, citrusy, your oak might not have been dried and seasoned well enough. So if we're talking about you've got to put new versus used oak on a label, I think we're firmly in the territory of you have to talk about if you smoked or not and what you used, or you have to talk about whether you put hops in it or not. And I really do think there's an argument, though. I'm not coming down on one side or the other of that argument. I think that's an argument that's worth having. I just think that we end up talking about all these things at once.
Yeah, and I agree. And just for us, Distillery Acadian, like I said, we're trying to be transparent and actually working on our new labels. Once we finally start getting to some bottled and bond products come out, revamp those labels, have true age statements, exact years, months coming out, but also potentially having what type of barrel that was, where'd that barrel come from? What was the char? What was the toast? I know me, I personally like to see that. I think others do as well. If you don't, read over it, but yeah, we'll see kind of, but I agree, you do have to be careful with these as well, because once you start putting too many regulations and too many things that you have to put on a label and where you have to put it, it gets to be too much, especially for some brands where they don't want a lot of, words. They want maybe their bottle or maybe their brand name to stand out versus all of these designations. That you have to have that consideration too. Then you kind of taking that away from them and making them have all these additional words that they don't want on their label.
Right. And brevity is key. Especially if you're relying on your label to sell products, which a lot of brands have to. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we've gone off into the weeds here. So Independent Stave Company for Westland, not sure about Westward. I recall the same thing, but as long as we're talking about detailing the data, I've started an American Single Malt Whiskey database. I don't remember if I've talked about this on stream before. On the subreddit, American SMW, I started an American Single Malt Whiskey database. And to say I started it is like taking too much credit, because Jenna Sagmoen of Westland sent me one version of a table that they were using to find basically comparison products in the industry, and another Reddit user who did some version of the same. And all I've done so far is put them in the same spreadsheet. But the idea is to collect a whole bunch of data about everybody who's making American Single Malt. It's an ambitious project, but I think it's an important one. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the people who want the information will read it and appreciate it. The people who don't want it won't read it.
Yep.
Distillers who want to be transparent will be transparent. And distillers who don't want to be transparent will follow the letter of the law. And I don't think that we should make the law harder for craft distilleries to follow to raise the lowest common denominator of transparency. That's a very good way of putting that.
Yeah, well said.
Pat myself on the back. Blanton's or nothing. Come on, Randall. All right. So I got a whole bevy of tasting notes while we were talking here. The one that stood out to me first, aside from the peanut brittle, I got pine nuts, which was really cool to me. I'm thinking like pignoli cookies and the like that. Yeah. And coconut, not quite toasted coconut, but like coconut fresh, like fresh coconut flesh. So I think it's common in ex-bourbon, it's common in American Single Malt, but it's usually covered up by other things. So it's cool that it's kind of on display here. And there was one other thing I got, which is escaping me now. Oh yeah, Chardonnay. There's a buttery wine
Oh, wow.
kind of flavor going on in here, which if you asked me last week, is that part of the flavor profile of this whiskey? I would say no, not at all. But somehow that's what I got today. So it's just it's interesting contrast. But I think that just goes to say there's a lot of complexity in here. I think there's a reason that everybody is really everybody who's really into American single malt is really enthusiastic about this product. So single malt frontier barrel pick, tiny barrel, Bon Vale, Bon Vale. How do you? I'm sorry,
Bon Vale. Yes.
Bon Vale.
Yeah. So Bon Vale was a fun word because my family heritage is half Scotland and half France. So Bon Vale was a old Gaelic word that meant it was a parting toast, and it was half Scottish and half French word to coming together. And basically, what it means is, until we meet again. So that's kind of what they said back in the day was Bon Vale rather than cheers.
Cool. Now I want to know how they spell it in Gaelic.
Oh, I
it's
can't.
Like BHILE.
Yeah.
BHAILE. I'm gonna.
Yeah, there's a whole write-up on that specific word, but
yeah, I wonder.
It kind of brings our heritage together. And you read the actual back label of the real bottle, it kind of talks about my grandmother and her coming from the area.
Yeah. All right, great question. And since I know you love working with the American single malt, you love the flavor and you think about it a lot. What is your favorite food pairing with this?
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. That's a great question.
I have a hot take here, but I'll wait.
I really don't know. I'm gonna have to think on that one. That's a good question.
So for me, I know I've given whiskey tastings and gotten feedback that I needed to have more food pairings recommended. I have a hard time with that. I think for me, I love food and I love whiskey. And when I have a really good food, the whiskey is a distraction. When I have a really good whiskey, the food is a distraction. I so far have not found a whiskey food pairing that did what a good pairing, a good wine pairing, for example, should make the wine and the food both better. They should be better together, right? To the degree that I've gone to really good restaurants where they have a wine pairing menu and then they say, we stand by the concept of pairing this food with something so strongly that if you are not drinking, if you're non-alcoholic, we have a non-alcoholic pairing menu for you that we have constructed with the same care in enhancing the flavors on both sides. I'm good with cocktails with my food. I'm good with wine with my food. I don't really like drinking wine solo. I like wine better with food. But whiskey, I don't like my whiskey with food. Exactly, Whiskey Shaman. That's for me, like I can get everybody's like, oh, Lagavulin 16 with a steak, Nick Offerman style. I get wanting to play into that. Excuse me. But for me, the steak and the whiskey are both made less by being paired together.
No, but that's a great. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. As far as whiskey, I'm with you as well, right? I don't really think of food with my whiskey, but I do think of cocktails. So we did a dinner a while back where we teamed up with a chef and going through I think it was a 5-course meal, got to the end of it, and the chef made a sweet potato crepe dessert with our whiskey, and we paired it with an Irish coffee, which people love that pairing together. So I'd say cocktails are a bit easier to give a pairing for me rather than just whiskey straight up, as it is, because I'm the same way. I don't really necessarily eat and drink my whiskey. I like to enjoy my whiskey maybe after a meal. And so, yeah, food pairing is a hard one, though.
Yep. Something that I picked up from people who review wine is they'll lean into the food pairing part of it. Actually, I'll say so along these lines, I picked this up from wine. They'll review wine. They'll have cranberries, walnuts, and like dry crackers, like a flavorless bread cracker nearby, right? Like saltine crackers, something like that. And they'll do the nose and the taste of the wine, and then they'll have a bite of the cranberry the dried cranberry, whatever it is, and then do more notes, and then the walnut and do more notes, and then the palate cleanser cracker and more notes. And they use that to build up a profile of the wine they wouldn't be able to get due to palate blindness or whatever solo. I think those kinds of food pairing with a whiskey, but this is like, do you want to review your whiskey in a different way? Right? Are you a whiskey reviewer? Are you a wine reviewer? Is this the way you want to experience your whiskey? You know, maybe having a bite of chocolate and having some whiskey, maybe that works. For
Well, I
me,
was
I don't.
about to say that analogy. That's probably one of my I don't say only ones, but that's straight where my mind goes to. If I eat a piece of chocolate and then I drink a whiskey, my whiskey, anybody else's whiskey, well, now I'm getting chocolate flavored whiskey. For me, it doesn't kind of accentuate the flavors of the whiskey. It just actually mutes them for me.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's a different experience. I think adding food to the whiskey experience is a different experience. Whiskey, as complex as it is when you're paying attention to it solo like this, you know, it's still, when you zoom out, whiskey is still an ingredient. For most people, what sells whiskey is not the enthusiasts who are going to sip their way through a bottle over 3 years, like me. What sells whiskey are the people who are going to buy a bottle, build a cocktail around a bar, especially bars, buy a bottle or a case, build a cocktail around it, and go through that quickly, because it is an ingredient. It's like buying one kind of onion or another. It's like buying one kind of protein or another, for your food. It's an ingredient that goes into these things, and building up a dish, an entree out of your spirit and your other ingredients, your garnishes, your vermouths, what have you, your citrus, and being able to pile those flavors up in a way that accentuates and stands up to the food, and also softens the alcohol. Because frankly, I'm getting older, and I know that a lot of people who drink whiskey are older than me. I get heartburn now. That's new. It's in the last 2-3 years. When I drink whiskey, especially with food, straight path to heartburn. But a cocktail works. So
yeah, and sometimes it's fun to pair it with a certain food where you may not even imagine drinking something like this. So we got teamed up with a bartender that we brought in for one of the dinners that we did. And I can't remember what the actual, it might have been, say, crab cakes or something like that. Something that we eat down here, right? Our Cajun food. But so this mixologist came in and took our Timoon that you just tasted, and he muddled some blueberries, made some basil stem simple syrup, and topped it off with the Timoon with champagne. So all of this combined, I mean, the guys in the room, not to say that women don't like whiskey. Well, not, the guys loved it. The women loved the lighter, kind of sweeter with the champagne note, and it worked. And for that specific, course of the meal, it was a fantastic pairing, because I can't remember if that had blueberries or why we did it, but it just worked. And to see some of these cocktails come together where you would have never imagined mixing Timoon with a champagne, and then it just kind of becomes one of your staples.
Yeah, I'm with you. That sounds like a brilliant cocktail. I want to go try it. I have to go buy some champagne. Hard times. Yeah. So Donut Fish says, I don't eat and drink together. However, Scotch egg with Kalila 17, that's a nice whiskey. Yeah. Not to be reductionist, but I feel like the Scots know how to pair food with whiskey.
Yeah.
Like a national drink, they've got the bar foods like Scotch eggs. It makes sense. Something's gonna work, right? Like I'll go to quarterly whiskey tastings, and we do this thing where we have chocolate, we have berries, we have French bread, we have cheese, and it's like you'll have some whiskey and then you'll go get a snack. And it's not like you're having them together. You're using the snacks as a palate cleanser. And then sometimes you'll pick a different snack and go back to the whiskey, and it's a different whiskey. I think that's different than saying I've got a steak and a potato and mushrooms and greens on the plate, and here's a glass of whiskey, and this is all meant to go together. Right? That's a very different thing. Yeah. But anyway, I think we've made the point, and the audience is in full agreement. So in the interest of time, probably best we move on at this point to talk about the bourbon just a little bit. So,
sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that specific sample of bourbon I got you, you said it was 114 proof. So
Yep.
what that tells me automatically is all of our single barrels that we put out to date before one other have always been, in the 120 range, anywhere from 100. I think 19 was the lowest we ever had. The highest we ever had was 130.1. So that the higher proofs tell me smaller barrels. Well, what we're seeing, and look, we haven't been at this 100 years. We're still learning and growing and trying to perfect our craft, not only for the whiskey we want to make, but where we're actually making the whiskey. And that's the most important. So we've used all small barrels to date. Well, a little over a year ago now, what we did was we transitioned up as we ramped up our production, where we went from 10 gallons to 15 gallons to 30s to 53 gallons. Well, about a little over a year ago, we dumped 98% of our 15-gallon barrels, and we put them into brand new 53-gallon barrels. So technically, these are going to be double oak. It won't hold the double oak name until it's a true double oak for us and the designation and the flavor profile that we want coming out of it. But what it is us getting out of the small barrel game. We're here hopefully for the long haul because look, the whiskey out of the small barrels is very good. But this whiskey that what you're drinking, and by taking it out of the small barrels, putting it into the larger, it's more approachable to the masses. That lower proof, you still get, some of the higher proof lovers. It's kind of in that sweet spot, right? So that's what that tells this specific whiskey is. Now, a big change that we did make whenever we went from the small barrels to the big ones was our barrel entry proof used to be 124. Well, when we mingled these barrels into the bigs, we went to 115. Because a big consideration here in Louisiana is because we're so hot and humid, we tend to pull more tannins out of the wood. Now, you do want some tannins within your whiskey, but you don't want too much. You don't want to outshine the whiskey itself. By having that lower barrel entry proof, you tend to pull less tannins out of the wood and more sugars out of the wood, which is, one of the reasons why you start hearing one of the concept of slow water reduction, where maybe they go into a slightly higher proof, but then as the years go on, then they're adding water to that barrel to now pull out different sugars within that wood throughout the aging process. Well, all of our, not only the barrels that you're drinking right there, but all of our new make, one, it's going into the 53-gallon barrels. That's all we fill now, but also our barrel entry proof is 115 for that reason. So look, if you're a proof seeker, I can guarantee you we won't be your distillery moving forward for that specific bottle of a hazmat. Now, maybe we'll have some hazmats coming out later for some other products, but for the masses, we're going to sit around that once we're done aging, anywhere from the 112 to the probably 117 range. And it's highly dependent on, the product, but also the month we put it in the barrel. What we're seeing, if we put it in the summer months, those barrels, as they're done aging, the proof is going up. If they're going in the winter, the proof is actually going down. So, like I said, I'll pull a barrel that's maybe right next to one another, maybe just a few months apart, but one's 119 proof, and then one right next to it's 130 proof. But that's kind of what what that specific sample you're drinking is, and more so what that is I guess the vision of the distillery and where we're headed.
Yeah, so I'm trying to imagine why the difference. Obviously, differences in humidities between the winter and the summer, but it's more humid in the summer, right?
Yes, it's more humid in the summer.
Okay, so more humid in the summer means more alcohol evaporating relative to water, and then the opposite in the winter. So you said proof goes up if you barrel it in the summer.
Yes, and proof goes down if we barrel it in the winter. But
that feels opposite
not
to me.
Always true.
Right? Okay.
It's that's what interests me completely right now. I'm totally immersed in it and really studying these barrels, and not only just the taste of notes and kind of where they're out at within the barrel house, but also, you know, when are they going into that, where was that specific barrel from, trying to find out information on that barrel. Yeah, that's what's really interests me, and also playing with different cooperages and seeing the different types of whiskey that they produce. Maybe filling a Kelvin right next to Independent Stave filled on the same day, and see the difference between those, even if they're the same char and toast levels. It's going to be a different whiskey.
Yeah, different sources of wood. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's fascinating. I wanna like sit down and think about that. That's not podcast airtime doing math. Yeah, every once in a while there's some technical question that really interests me, and I end up doing a write up about it. This might be one of those. Gulf Coast aging is something I feel very few people talk about. I mean, it makes sense. Every region is
we're a different
but...
animal. Like I made the comment earlier, you know, our 6 year kind of baseline of what I think you're going to see mainly out of the Gulf South. Yes, you're going to see some older ones. You'll see some younger ones as well, but age is just a number. That's why I try to tell people and preach and teach people is there's so much that goes into a number. Not just where it was aged, what product went into it, what type of barrels and chars, and what is your rick house? What does your barrel house look like? Do you have ventilation? Are there multiple levels? Are you rotating these barrels? Are they horizontal or palletized?
Right.
All of those factors apply to that age statement. So when someone says, "Oh, it's only a 6 year," and I'm used to drinking 12 year. Let's read into this a little bit more and see kind of what it is.
Let's get into the details.
Yeah, because you have a 23 year from, let's say, the States, and you have a 23 year from Canada. You're going to have a different color, most definitely, and you're going to have a different flavor profile. Now, it's probably going to be a different whiskey also, but yes, age is just a number, is what I like to say.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the difference in philosophy between... I feel like some of the older age statement Buffalo Trace products kind of go the direction of, we kind of aged fast and then we did it longer. It's still fast aging, whatever it is that they're doing. And then there's products like I don't know, Knob Creek seems to be a lot softer for kind of the same age. Still Kentucky. Don't quite know. You know, I haven't looked into it too close. I don't quite know what the difference is that is making it. So
I mean, it could be a metal building versus a brick building. That plays into it as well, the ventilation. And this is not me trying to preach and say, oh, 6 years is better, because, you know, that's where I want to age. No, I'm trying to say that because I don't think I'm going to go to 8 years, because I don't want to drink the whiskey coming out of the barrel 8 years. Now we'll see as time goes on, and I may, you know, completely flop my opinion, because I'll tell you as well, when I first started this distillery, I tried to more or less buck the system to say that's not true, that you have to age barrel in a big 53-gallon barrel to be a great whiskey. You can do it in a small barrel, and I'm gonna prove the point. And now I've completely flopped my opinion on that. Now I think you can make a very good whiskey in a small barrel, but especially considerations of the Gulf South, you have to be in a big barrel to make the best whiskey, which is why we made that big move, and why it cost us a lot of money. Look, to dump those barrels that they may have only been aging 6 months, some of those barrels in those small 15 gallons, dumping those and going to another brand new barrel, that costs a lot of money. So it was a big decision that we made. Hopefully it works out and it was the right decision. But what I'm seeing of the kind of more approachable whiskey, kind of what you're drinking now, and even what I'm seeing more with our new make, that's kind of what I want to be known for in our brand.
All right. So I do want to get your answers to all those questions that influence aging. Just real rapid fire, if you could go through the factors of, you know, what type of warehouse is it? Is it racks or palletized? And so on. We know the barrel entry proof. Still type, I don't think I asked you about.
Yeah, so we use a 300-gallon reflux still. It's copper and stainless. It's a 4-plate reflux, depending on the product we're making or what type of that product we're trying to make is how many plates we actually run. Again, we have to be careful because we run all plates. You start distilling over 160 proof. Now you're no longer bourbon. Now you're into the American light whiskey. We pull off the still around 140 proof and proof down to 115 going barrel entry. Now barrel house will change because we're over the next year and a half, we're actually building out our new distillery. Not only a bigger, nicer facility, but it's going to tenfold our production. And with that, our barrel aging is a massive consideration for that. So our barrel house is going to have even better ventilation coming off of it. No insulation. We want this Louisiana heat and humidity. We accept that, but we're also part of our barrel house is going to be palletized, which is primarily what we do now with other consideration for some other products. But the other half and some of it is going to be horizontal. So I want to see that as well. That's going to be a next big test as well. So not only this heat, but how does that impact maybe the different orientation on the barrel as well?
Okay, awesome. Thanks for quickly answering those questions. I felt like last podcast we did, I sort of glossed over some technical questions and chat was left hanging. So I wanted to make sure that we got all that technical detail out there so that people know where to find it. Also try to do a write-up of the technicals at some point in that database, if nothing else. Quick tasting notes on this, and then I think we'll wrap up because we're a little bit over time. So again, I like taking this bourbon after the other products. I think that there's an interesting contrast that like the distillery style sort of helps contextualize some of the other flavor notes a little bit because, like you said, there's a lot of tannins in this bourbon. And if I'm coming at this cask strength bourbon on a completely fresh palate, it strikes me like a lot of cask strength bourbon, which is like, wow, that's tannic. And it takes a little bit to get beyond that. But having these other products as a warm up first, I get to get beyond that a little bit. So the tasting notes that I was getting, we have maple syrup was the strongest note that was coming through, interestingly enough. It got some wood varnish, but I say that in like a good way. Like there's that sort of deep like wood tannic structure that like for me it's like if it goes too far it's kind of paint thinner or acetone, but like wood varnish is like on the good side of it, or shoe polish, something like that. I get the bourbon cherries, but not a lot of the other classic bourbon notes that I'd expect to get from the wood. I also got something minty, and I'm having a hard time nailing this down. I don't think it's like sassafras, but it's like something in the realm of root beer. And then the last one I got was there's rooibos tea in here, which is like that sort of I don't know. Do you guys know what rooibos tea is? It's like it's a decaf. It's not a true tea. It's a decaf. There's these little red needles. They I can't remember the name of it. It's like the tea backing of what's that flower you make tea with? It's like a red flower. I can't remember what it's called. might just have to trail off on this thought. But anyways, rooibos tea. So that was sort of like, I think that's what the tannic structure resolved into for me. So I find this pretty interesting. I think the theme on this show is that we're like not huge fans of bourbon. We like single malt better.
Sure.
But we do find that the farther we get away from the typical sorry, I saw a comment in chat and that threw my brain off. The farther you get away from the typical assumptions around like Kentucky bourbon, like what that's going to taste like, how that's going to be aged, I tend to like bourbon if it's not Kentucky bourbon.
Well, that's a good point. Starting our bourbon, that was we didn't want to make your typical Kentucky bourbon, or even other states as well. We want to kind of be coming to this unapologetically bold, right? Be true craft, true to our nature. Like I said in the very beginning, I've never made a traditional bourbon mash. So what you drink right there is 12% rye, 6% wheat, 13% malted barley, and a remainder of corn. So it's a 4 grain bourbon to try to give you a bit more well-rounded, but again, craft, big flavors kind of coming out of it.
Okay, South African floral tea sort of jogged my memory. So hibiscus tea is what I was thinking of. And the tea component of hibiscus tea is sometimes rooibos. So that's where I was coming from on that one. Yeah. Do you know if that South African floral tea is related to hibiscus, or are we talking about completely different things? For completion, there's a scientific name for you. That's real geeky on flowers. I'm gonna follow up on that later. I'm not even gonna try to read those words. I understood some of those words.
Oh yeah, I've done my research on some flowers. For our gin, we actually wanted to put magnolia in it because that's our flower for the state and all that. And when I had to submit my label for TTB, they asked to get FDA approved, and FDA came back and said, well, we don't consider magnolia as regarded as generally safe with alcohol. And
right.
They asked which one I was using. It was Grandiflora, and they basically they shut it down for us. And I said, hold on, time out. I said, you have this distillery, and I didn't call them out by name, but I said, you have one over here in this state, you have another one in this state. They're using magnolia in their one of them was a gin, one of them was another product, but basically what they told me was, yeah, even though we're federal, we're state run and we don't talk to one another, but you're more than welcome to hire a lawyer and spend $50,000 to try to get that flower in that gin. So that's kind of was the end of my research in flowers.
Not nearly big enough to make that decision.
Right.
But so magnolia, there's been like this TikTok that's gone around where there's this lady who makes magnolia snap cookies, because magnolia has a kind of a gingery flavor, and if you do an extraction, so I'm kind of disappointed that product didn't come to life, because I've heard great things about. There's also the guy who makes he makes ice cream out of trees and tree parts like flowers and whatever, and then he makes bowls out of the wood from the same tree. And he also did a magnolia ice cream and the magnolia bowl, and that was a fun thing. I don't know the names of these creators. I apologize.
No,
people are going to know what I'm talking about.
That's the things that interest me. When I
Leave it in the
started
comments.
to get into this, before there was even a distillery, and now I'm going to forget the name of it, but there was a show on TV. And what this guy did was he traveled all around the world to try these different spirits. He tried one, went to overseas, and they took sap from a tree and made a spirit out of it. He went to maybe South America, and they made something called spit beer, where they literally chew it up and spit it up, and it ferments itself. But that's making these different products and coming together and having that unique story. That's what got me interested in this entire distillery.
I remember growing up watching Anthony Bourdain, Andrew Zimmern, those like sort of travel and try things. That's sort of what got me really interested in like food from all over, and where it comes from and how it's made and what it tastes like. And yeah, I think you don't get to becoming like a whiskey reviewer without having a good vocabulary of flavors. You kind of got to start somewhere with food and drinks of other sorts, because as I like to say to people who are like first learning to taste whiskey, like whiskey tastes like whiskey. There's nuances and variations, and what we're naming with these tasting notes are like, how does it move off center? In what direction is it not quite the same as everything else you've ever had? Not that this really tastes like coconut, although sometimes those flavors are really uncanny, and it actually really does. But most of the time, the flavor notes that we're putting out are sort of like, we commonly accept the vocabulary that this is whiskey moving in that direction. Not necessarily that this is all the way to cherries, but this is bourbon that tastes a little bit more in the cherry direction, something like that.
Yeah, and for me personally, look, I can make it all day long till I'm blue in the face. One, I'm not very good at saying the tasting notes or knows that I kind of get out of it. But I also on purpose tend to veer away from that, because if I come into, let's say you see my distillery for the first time, I go through each one of them and I start giving tasting notes that, oh, you're going to get creme brulee from this. Guess what you're going to taste? Creme brulee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you start putting words into people's heads. Now, if people start getting stumped, well, I don't know what that tastes, it's something, then maybe I can help out at that point. But to come out the gate, for me personally, especially on tours and tastings that I do, I tend to stay away from tasting notes and let the individual come up with their own, because it's nice to hear. You've said something tonight that I've never heard before. So it's nice to hear that the individual palates on what you kind of get out of that.
Yeah, there was, I have a Scotch group where we do blinds, like we send each other blind samples all the time. This is different from Germ's, but check out the Blind Sample Showdown, because Germ does this on YouTube for a bunch of people. But we'll all get the same samples, like a dozen of us get the same samples, and we'll taste them at different times, not necessarily together. And the tasting notes are wildly different. And we, the people who have tasted it, are like, no, that makes sense, right? Like you got bleached paper and I got sawdust, and somehow like it's different words for the same thing, right?
Right.
But like it gets even, like sometimes it takes the whole tasting note profile to be like, oh, okay, I get what you're saying, right? Like this is cake and chocolate frosting and walnuts and coconut, and somebody else said something else and came up with like lemon and honeysuckle and sooty candle wax, and somehow at the end of the day we were like, yeah, I got that. Right. Like in retrospect, we wrote different notes and then we talked about it and we said, no, like we're clearly tasting the same thing. We didn't use any of the same words, but we're clearly tasting the same thing.
But then you get some really wild ones as well. So my parents did actually a wine tasting class at our local college and went through the whole thing. I remember this story vividly, and my dad loves to tell it, where they tasted a wine and the instructor's going through some of the tasting notes, and he's like, oh yeah, and then kind of on the back end you get a little bit of cat pee. And he looked at him and said, how do you know what cat pee tastes like?
Well, if you've had a cat, not that you tasted it, right? Yeah, there was I'll see if I can find this and link it in the comments on one of these videos. I've talked about this before. Somebody wrote a review of an Armagnac, and it was like multiple screens of text long, and it was like 100 out of 100. I've never tasted anything better than this. But among the tasting notes were like baby vomit and like things that I'd rather not verbalize, right?
Right.
Like things that individually, and if you picked out just those few items and put them together and said that sounds disgusting, and yet the fact that you found 100 tasting notes and you personally are fully convinced they're all there and you value complexity, it makes sense to me that is your favorite thing that you've ever had.
Well, and I wonder if it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Are you just sipping it alone, or are you eating that cracker or that cranberry? Right. And is that for some reason pulling in certain other notes that maybe don't exist, but maybe combined with it? You know, I have little kids and we watched the movie Ratatouille. And the rat comes in and he has a piece of cheese and I don't know, a cracker some, and then gets hit by lightning and puts them together and tastes it. And it's a completely different experience. So it could be that as well. Just like we talked about, you know, I eat a piece of chocolate. Well, now I'm getting chocolate flavored whiskey. It removes all the actual whiskey notes for me personally. And I can't fully experience what that whiskey is about.
Yep. All right, so we're creeping up on 2 hours now. So I want to just first of all thank you for being here. This is a great conversation. We really leaned into the talking about a little bit of everything today, which I think is great. Like I said, people sell products. This call it parasocial relationship that the audience gets to build up with you is going to make people look for your products. That's what I hope we're doing here. And just to close the loop on a conversation we had earlier. About the hibiscus and the African floral tea. They're both rosids, but they're in different families. So at least we were kind of in the same ballpark. Thanks for Riff Raff's elbow for helping out with that. And they clarify, I definitely did not know that offhand. So Hey, some people have encyclopedic knowledges of these things. You know, I have a friend who is also really into whiskey, but he's like, I don't know how you hold tasting notes of 300 bottles in your head at any given time, right? It's just we're built different. Some people are just built different.
Yeah, I have friends like that. I was with actually watching one the other night, and he tasted one certain whiskey, and it's, I know this one, and went to his wall of whiskey, and ended up took him maybe a time or two, but ended up picking that other bottle that he felt tasted exactly like that other one. So it's an impressive trait to have.
Yeah. And on that note, because some people can do that on a regular basis, go check out Freedom Malt's channel, the Blind Sample Showdown. I'm just gonna highlight his laughing face. Check out Freedom Maltz. He does the Blind Sample Showdown. Lots of different creators go on and try to blind guess whiskeys, and whoever gets closest wins. It's all good fun. I've been on there a couple of times. I did not win. I won once, but I've lost twice so far. So, you know. Anyways, I've completely drained my glasses except for just the tiny dregs of the bourbon here. So with this, I'm going to say, once again, Philip, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for teaching us all about what you do. And until next time, I'll see you in the lodge.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.